Right, so we left off last time looking at this Herald 1360 engine with trying to put the rocker shaft on, and I couldn't get it bolted down without putting pressure on all of the valves, which even with all the adjusters as far out as they would go, they were still pushing on the valves, and obviously we need clearance there. Now I've compared lots of things. You see, I got the bonnet of the Spitfire up here because I've got the rocker cover off that and have been measuring bits of that engine as well to try and figure out what's going on. So I found that this head, which is a Spitfire Mark III style head, is close to the same thickness as the one on the Spitfire. Good. The original 1360 head is about 1.5 to 2 mil thicker, which makes sense. It's a lower compression head, and one of the ways of lowering the compression without reshaping the combustion chamber is obviously to have more thickness, so it's sitting higher up, you've got more volume. Push rods are the same length. I've been able to measure the valve protrusion above the head on both the car and the engine, and that's roughly the same. I mean, these are measurements that's difficult. It's quite difficult to make with any sort of great deal of precision, but we're looking for millimetres of difference. So I found if I put some washers underneath the rocker pedestals, they were about 1.7 mil, then it will go on. I can set sensible clearances. But that doesn't seem right, because raising the rocker shaft changes the geometry at which the rocker works, and you wouldn't want to do that if you take material off the bottom of the head, because that doesn't actually change the geometry of the rocker shaft and the valve. So eventually what I did, just as a test, was to put on used, too worn to be useful, rocker shaft that I had. So the last check I did, the final check, was to take the spare rocker shaft, because I have two. I assessed them both for where they're very worn, so I kept them together just to keep the order of the parts that you want to keep, the pedestals and springs and things. So I just tried putting on the used rocker shaft just to see if it would fit, and that's bolted down. That goes fine. So I decided to have a closer look at the rockers themselves, and we'll show you what I found. Okay, let's see how well we can show this. So this is a used rocker shaft. It's too worn to be usable, but works for what we need. This is a new rocker, and this is a NOS one, new old stock one, straight out of a Leyland packet. Unfortunately, I've only got two of these. Now if we put them on and line up the working face, so that's with the working faces are aligned, and you see how much more adjustment is available on the original one. So that's it's a couple of millimetres, which is what we need. So the new versus old comparison doesn't look very good, and what I think I'm going to have to do is take these new rockers and cut a bit off of this face. It's going to allow this adjuster screw to go further up in the fitted orientation, and let me then actually have enough adjustment to be able to get them onto the engine. Now you can actually see, this is the new one, this is the NOS one. This has a machined face on that underside, this does not. Both machined on the top face. So it would suggest this should have been done. So my slight concern with that though is, am I going to be weakening the integrity of the whole thing? I don't know. So I'm having to think about that. I'm not doing anything immediately, but in the meantime, there's still some bits to do on the engine. So get the sump on and the distributed drive gear end float set, and that might be it. But I'll find out as I'm going on. Definitely need to make sure I've still got I do have all the parts, because I keep finding bits I still need. Yeah, so let's get on with something. I've been doing my hardware checkup again before putting anything in, putting any bolts in. Now the catalogue specifies two different bolts for the sump, 11 of one and 5 of another. However, it appears that the 5 are, some of which I've just taken off, they look to be bolts with an integrated spring washer that are 5/8 long, and the others are bolts without an integrated spring washer that are 5/8 long. So actually I've got most of them are pretty good, so I'm going to reuse what I can. What I'm doing differently is, because I've got this solid steel sealing block, it has through holes, so into the engine. So those are going to get copper washer. I'm actually using some of the longer bolts, the 3/4 inch bolts I took off the sump. Off this sump when I removed it, which I think were in just some of the other through holes that go to the outside of the block. So yeah, let's get it all put together. Since I had the rocker cover off of the Spitfire, I ended up checking the valve clearances there, doing a bit of maintenance before putting it back, and then I've just bitten the bullet. You can see they line up much better now. So I've just taken a little bit off with the bench grinder. The rockers have got machine face put on the tool rest, and just take a little bit off parallel to that. It does make the new one thinner there overall. I'm just going to try it with the rest. So I've discovered quite irritatingly, this is old versus new, the thread of the adjusters is the same, but the old original ones have an imperial outer on the nut, and the new ones have a metric outer on the nut. So that probably means I'm going to go and switch some nuts around, because I don't like having metric stuff on the car, just because it means I need to go digging out spanners. Anyway, hopefully this is going to work. Let's see how it goes. Okay, so taking the rocker shaft back apart, and I've taken about 1.5 millimeters off the bottom of that face for each. So I don't know if this will come across on the camera, but the finish on the top face is great, isn't it? Anyway, I'm going to get all these cleaned up, make sure there's no grinding remnants, and then put them back on the rocker shaft, and hopefully then that will be able to be installed on the engine. Okay, hopefully this is second time lucky. I'll get this used shaft off. Okay, so I have just done a very rough run through to check that I would be able to set at least a 10 thou gap on all these rockers now they've been modified, and it looks like I can. 6 is only just there. So let's get these torqued up and then get the gap set. Rocker cover on, top end's done. Now there's an obvious question here of why didn't you just send them back? And the answer is I didn't expect I'd get anything better. Unfortunately, we end up with some rubbish parts in this hobby, and I've had very little success trying to speak to suppliers about that. I tend to get the response, no matter who, of a shrug, and well, they're all like that. So I thought the most expedient way of getting something done was to do as we've done and modify these rockers. Is it the right idea? well, we'll find out in a couple of some 1,100 miles. They were very definitely different to the new old stock Leyland ones I've got, and I'm happy that I'm relatively confident that the geometry of the rocker gear is going to be in the acceptable region. Guess we're going to see. So let's get the gap set. There we are, all off, all on again, and adjusted. I decided to just stick on one of the NOS ones I've got, because I've got two, so I've still got one as a reference if I need to do any comparisons like this again, and it just meant I could stick something on without cleaning and grinding and what have you. But it's a good comparison, actually. There's my pointer. If you look at these, look at the difference. That is the original one. So you can see the actual adjustment height. It's about the same, but this chunk here, this back bit, is rather different. Anyway, that's all done. I will get the rocker cover on. I don't think there's anything else to do here, is there? I think then I'll have to be thinking about getting in the car, won't I? I'm a bit stuck on... I need some bits for mounting the alternator, because I've got the proper bracket there now. Previously it was on using bits of the dynamo mounting. I might put it back like that to enable me to get the front lift eye on, and then I can put the thing in the car and I can start fitting up exhaust manifolds, etc. while I wait for my replacement camshaft keeper to come. Don't know, I'll have to have a think. Okay, I'm going to do the distributed drive gear end flow. So when this gear goes in here, we engage with the oil pump in this slot and the camshaft with this gear, and then the distributor in this sort of funky slot thing. So when the camshaft turns, it drives the oil pump and the distributor. Now there's a specification for the amount of end flow between this top piece, or with the gear, once this is installed. And we achieve that by the number of gaskets that go between this pedestal and this part of the engine block. And we figure that out. Let's take a washer, which goes over there, install the gear, put the pedestal on, and then measure the gap that's left. Because the gear will be sitting right against that pedestal, and then will be pushed up by the washer so that it's actually raising the pedestal. So I've actually given this washer a bit of a flat back on some emery paper on a sheet of glass, because it had some little burrs from how it had been pressed. And that washer thickness, 2.27mm. Okay, so the engine, need to turn the engine and spin this a bit till it drops down and engages with the oil pump and the camshaft gear. So I now can't move it. So then this pedestal goes on. Okay, so I've got my washer in here, drive gear, pedestal on. Just going to get this just tight. So with this snug down, one set of feeler gauges fully in, I get a snug fit with these two more. Measuring them gives me 2.33mm. So we've got a gap of 2.33, a washer of 2.27. That means if the washer's removed, we go down by 2.27, so we've still got a gap we'd still have a gap of 0.06 millimeters, which means we need 0.06 millimeters to come to 0 end float, and then we need to add on enough to bring us to the 0.076 to 0.178. So in that case, one of these gaskets, 0.15 millimeters, will get us an end float of 0.09, which is perfectly acceptable. I found that turning the engine backwards lets the gear come free quite easily. So I'm leaving the gear out for the moment, but I'm putting the pedestal and the gasket there. So that's all ready to go. It's just taking me quite a long time of going back and forth and checking and rechecking to be happy that I've got timing as good as I can, in as good a position as I can. I've ended up with my inlet centre point at 106 degrees, 106.5, which I believe is acceptable. It's a little bit advanced, but I believe that's better than being a little bit on the other side, and that's where I was kind of oscillating between. I couldn't hit 110 exactly. So I'm calling this good. I have remarked timing gear because I did mark it prematurely, and I can get on with getting ready to actually put the engine in the car, because I've now got some extra mounting bits that I needed for the alternator to go on with the actual alternator bracket, rather than previously it was sort of cobbled on with bits of dynamo bracket and a large stack of washers, and I need that so I can get the lifting eye on and actually get it in the car. But also now that the timing's done, I can get this front end all tidied up, get the timing chain tensioner and cover on, front pulley and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, let's get on with it. You wouldn't believe how long it's taken me just to put a timing cover on. I've put the chain tensioner on and then figured out actually it's supposed to have a washer either side of the tensioner inside the little bracket, so I would take it off again. So the timing chain cover has this pattern of panhead screws, and these are all the ones that are just threaded into the front engine plate, which is obviously not hugely thick. And in particular, this one goes inside the engine and is labelled in the manuals as supposed to be being short. And this one here, if you have an alternator bracket fitted, it needs to not hit the alternator bracket and go in there. So the original ones are pretty tiny. I bought some new ones, but they're longer. They're also crosshead posi drive, but might just clear with the thickness of the cover and the thickness of the gasket. This one here needs to be short because it'll hit the main bearing cap, which I can just feel there. So I don't think this is going to work. Actually measuring the depth of just sticking the scribe in there, the new ones might just work, so I'm going to try them since I bought them. And I don't want to end up with... I don't mind it being a posi drive, but I don't want to end up with some flathead and some not, because even though I'm not really going to be looking in the front of the engine bay, that will irritate me. On the other hand, I do have enough to use the flathead ones. I'll see if they go in without bottoming out. Okay, so I've done a dry test, and those ever so slightly longer bolts are going to work. One of they are set screws, so I think I can get that on. nearly being able to put the engine in the car. Last night I got the water pump housing on, alternator sort of on, the timing chain cover on, front pulley, or loosely I've still not torqued that up. So there's nothing really left that needs to go on before it can go in the car. I didn't quite get the alternator on fully because it's not lining up. I've still got a dynamo bracket at the top bracket, and the alternator ones are actually bent slightly rather than being in the same plane as the very front of the water pump housing. And also the alternator does not appear to be lining up very well with the front crankshaft pulley. So I'm going to get the water pump on just temporarily and then see how well that lines up. And then I'll be able to hopefully that'll work. That'll be in the right plane, and I'll be able to adjust the alternator accordingly. Actually, I'm just going to get this fitted on properly. So this is actually a professionally rebuilt original water pump. The reason I've been hesitating about putting it on this engine is because it officially belongs to the Spitfire. It came with the Spitfire, but it's got paint on it, and I may as well use the good one, you know, nominally better one. So I'm just going to get that actually fully fitted. I think to start with I'm just going to do up this lower bolt tightly, because there's a bit of a space between the cast mounting and plate, and at the bottom there's a little spacer in the alternator housing itself, and that can actually move back and forth to compensate for slightly different widths of mounting point here. So it might be just enough to pull it back in line. Right, so I think what I will do is take this spacer off, put it in the lathe, and take about 2mm off the front. There's that spacer, a little bit shorter. Let's see if it's too short. Okay, that's looking pretty good. It's out by maybe 1mm, but I think that's acceptable. It's also brought the top mounting in enough that I think a thick washer under that bracket is going to be sufficient to put it in the right place, which is great. I didn't really want to have to start bending this. Well, this is now ready to go off the stand. Obviously, before it goes back in the car, it needs the rear engine plate, flywheel, yeah, just those two things. Obviously, the spigot bush for the gearbox input shaft needs to go in the crankshaft as well. But for that, it needs to come off of the stand, and to get that done, I was missing my front lifting arm. So, with the alternator on, and the old fan belt, because the new one I bought is the wrong length, I think this is a good stopping point for this episode. So, thanks for watching, commenting, subscribing, and in the next one we'll be able to get it in the car.